Welcome back to Live from Occupy City Hall. My name is Leslie Roth. I'm a member of the May 30th Alliance, and today we're going to take some time to speak about the importance of challenging the American value system. Just as many things that we've talked about in previous episodes of Live from Occupy City Hall, and I've reiterated this multiple times, and I'll continue to reiterate this multiple times because you never know who's watching for the first time. We won't be able to fully dissect any specific topic in the amount of time that we are using for these episodes, but what we want these episodes to be are entryways into deeper conversations about these topics. And so all of these topics will be revisited again with other people and with more people conversing, and will be visited again in deeper and deeper layers and levels, and probably with longer extended conversations as well. So in this episode, we want to pick an institution and communicate the importance of challenging that specific institution. We want to pick one ideology and take time to speak about the importance of challenging that one ideology. And then at the end, I'm going to take one holiday and speak about the importance of challenging the institutions and ideologies that are connected to that holiday, and allow that to be a gateway for people to challenge other institutions and other ideologies and other holidays that are all connected to those first ones that I speak about. And in subsequent episodes, we will challenge other institutions and other ideologies and other holidays. So this may not come as a surprise, but the first institution I want to speak about challenging is the institution of policing. I think that one of the primary reasons we have to challenge the institution of policing is deeply connected with the origins of policing. I think that it is the exception when you can find anything that begins in a corrupt or negative manner and does not eventually, or does not through time, produce corrupt and negative things. And part of the issue with policing is that policing was something that is an institution that was not created to protect people. It was not created to serve people. It was created to maintain status quo. And one of the best ways to understand that is to go and look through all 50 states and see the different ways that police are used, to look through the history of those 50 states and see the different ways that police are used and have been used. When there was an issue of slaves, of maintaining the status quo of slavery, of maintaining the status quo of the subjugation of black people, the first line of defense for that was the police. When there was a historical need to, which still exists in different manners now, to maintain the power that corporations and the elites had in businesses, and there was labor struggles that were going on. The first people who were the first line of defense in those labor struggles for the people in power and for the elites was the police. And when you look at Jim Crow and the challenging of Jim Crow and the challenging of the civil, and before we even get to there, let's go back some. When you look at once chattel slavery had been ended, and it was now an issue of maintaining some type of power over these newly freed black people or recently unenslaved black people, the black codes were created, and the people who maintained those black codes, the first line of defense, again, were the police. And so that's a small talking point about hundreds of years of American history with policing. And as I talked about in previous episodes, the importance of reading, the book The End of Policing by Alex Vitale was the first time that I really had someone challenge my beliefs and my thought patterns and my value systems when it came to the importance of policing, the role that police play in our society, the role that they have played historically in our society. And you cannot, and this is again an analogy we've used before, but you cannot come in halfway through a movie or halfway through a TV show and think you know who the good guy is, or think you know who the bad guy is, or the protagonist or the antagonist, because part of being the protagonist or the antagonist is the things that have led up to the past to get you to the present. And when you look at the past of the history of policing, you view the present history of policing in a very different manner. And most people are divorced and removed from the information about the past history of policing. And so when you challenge policing and the institution of policing, that is not challenging keeping people safe. That is not challenging protection. That is not challenging community. That is not challenging the violence that exists in our country. That's not saying that, you know what, let's not do anything to protect people or do anything to keep people from violent trauma and from psychological trauma. That's not what any of those things means. What it means when you are challenging the institution of policing is that you're challenging the idea that this institution does and serves those things. Because an institution can't protect people if one of the ways it does it is by harming other people. Because then that institution doesn't stand for protection. It stands for the protection of some, does not stand for the protection of all. And protecting some and not protecting all is not protection, One of the things that is connected to a lot of these institutions are ideologies of racism. A lot of these institutions that we need to challenge are rooted and were created with racist policies, racist procedures, and racist ideologies in mind. And they still maintain those racist ideologies to this day. It's why in Rockford, Illinois, if you are black, you are 3 times as likely to be pulled over by the police, even though there's triple the amount of white people here. It's the reason that crack cocaine, when you were caught with it, you got 100 times more or 100 times worse of a sentencing than you did if you got caught with powder cocaine. They knew and were informed that black people were more likely to have crack cocaine, white people were more likely to have powder cocaine. And again, when we go back and we talk about the black codes, when we go back and we talk about slavery and the history of the institution of slavery and how police were slave catchers, or a lot of policing originated in this country as slave catching, and how, again, that was racist ideologies that were at the root of those things. And that ideology is at the root of the economy that exists here. That ideology is at the root of education as it exists here. The ideology is at the root of holidays that exist here. And far too often you'll hear people talk about playing the race card or not playing the race card, or not calling somebody racist, or how you are being careful to not want to attribute to somebody the title of being racist. And I think the best way I've ever heard it be put is, and I can't remember who said this, I think it was Angela Davis, but she said somebody who, a white man or white person living in America their whole lives and never doing anything to become informed about racism, or never doing anything to become educated about racism, and then telling people that they aren't racist, is like somebody standing in the middle of a rainstorm with no umbrella and no poncho and saying that they're not wet. You know, it's inevitable when you grow up in this society that you are going to buy into racist ideologies, that you are going to buy into racist belief systems and racist thought patterns, because that is what this country teaches you. And the country teaches you that because that is the history of this country. The Winnebago County Sheriff deputies here walk around with a badge of a indigenous chief on their shoulders. Multiple different counties and police departments in this area have that, and around the country have that. And there were sports teams that were named that are now getting rid of those names and getting rid of those, you know, the Cleveland Guardians now and the Washington Commanders now. And those things happen because people recognize that those emblems and those symbols were directly connected to racism, and that the history of indigenous people in this country has been one that is deeply connected with racism. The history of black people in this country has been one that is completely connected with racism. And trying to separate those two things is nonsensical. It's just not possible. And when you look at the institutions that exist here, any of those institutions, when you learn about the history of them, racism pops up. If you decide right now today you want to learn about the history of the education in America, you start going back, you're going to see racism. You want to learn about the history of sports teams, you go back, you're going to learn about racism. Want to learn about the history of the government, the history of the economy, the history of the Army, the history of the Navy, the history of lawyers, the history of doctors, the history of medicine. Whatever it is, when you learn about the histories of it in this country, racism is at every single chapter. And so until there's a progression and an effort made on this country's behalf to remedy those things, to address those things adequately, then there is no such thing as playing the race card. The same way there's no such thing as a post-racial society, or no such thing as I don't see color. When somebody, the best way I've ever seen this put is when somebody tells you that they don't see color, it means that they are invalidating your experience. Because if you are a person of color, your experience is going to be dictated by that color. The experiences of your mother and father were dictated by their color. The experience of your grandmother, grandfather, great-grandmother, great-grandfather, great-great, the further back you go, all of those things in this country have been dictated by their color, by their race. And what are you if not a direct residual effect of those past experiences that they've had? If you can understand the concepts of, and I don't know if it's inherited trauma or the right way that they put it, but it's basically, and I hope that I'm putting this in the right terms. One of our far back ancestors had a fear of snakes, and the fear of snakes was something that kept them safe from being harmed by snakes. And so it was passed on generation to generation until eventually, you're born with this fear of snakes. And I'm probably putting this in horribly scientific, psychological terms. But the concept is the same here, where if your great-great-grandfather, and then your great-grandfather, and then your grandfather, and then your father all had specific things happen to them that traumatized them and that happened because of their race, then you have to understand that part of who you are is a direct response to those traumas that were inflicted by race. And so we have to challenge the ideology of racism that exists in this country. Here in Rockford, Illinois, when the 4th of July parade goes on, they put the police at the forefront of the 4th of July parade. And so you see and they put the police throughout the entire 4th of July parade. They bring out tanks, they bring out all types of extra weapons that they have, or extra gear, whatever that they have. And that's one of the things that you see duplicated in multiple cities and multiple areas. When parades come, police bring out their tanks and bring out their armored vehicles, and everybody screams and shouts at these instruments of terrorism. And one of the things here, specifically in Rockford, Illinois, that happened at this 4th of July parade this year is, as we were protesting, leaving messages about the history of the 4th of July, leaving messages about the history of some of the individuals who are celebrated on the 4th of July, we wrote that Thomas Jefferson had black slaves. Thomas Jefferson had slaves, was a slaveholder, had enslaved people, is the better way to put it, and that he raped the people that he enslaved. He had children with these women that he raped through enslavement, and then he enslaved those children that he had. And there is a school in Rockford, Illinois, Thomas Jefferson High School, named after the great raping racist slaveholder. And slaveholder. And so, 'cause, 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 As the parade was coming down East State Street, right here behind me, this main street, they had some young women, young girls, and teenagers who all went to high school, went to Thomas Jefferson High School. They were cheerleaders. And as they came down the street, they did a routine that must have been set up to be done in this specific intersection, at the intersection where these messages were written in chalk. And the irony of a parade that was orchestrated by white people, celebrating a white nationalist, white supremacist holiday. It's important to remember, July 4th, 1776, black people was enslaved, black women would be enslaved, black women in general were not granted any rights. The Constitution don't say all people are created equal. It says all men are created equal, and black men were not even considered to be men. They were considered to be subhuman. And so that was a very specific people that they were talking about that were created equal. But to see these young black girls doing this routine on top of these messages, wearing Thomas Jefferson cheerleading outfits while this holiday was being celebrated, again, just these complex ironies that exist because of the accepting of the value system that exists in this country. And it's not the fault of these young girls that this is happening. It's not the fault of young black kids who wear red, white, and blue on the 4th of July, or have star-spangled shirts from, what's this? Old Navy got a bunch of the red, white, and blue flag shirts. It's not these children's fault. It's the fault of the village, the adults, the past generations who didn't challenge these traditions, who didn't challenge these holidays, who in an effort to want to be included, in an effort to want to have inclusivity, were willing to look past the history and the roots of these traditions and these holidays. And far too often, I find black people say, well, I'm just letting off fireworks, or it's just a reason for me to get with my family, or it's always some type of reason that they want to attribute to it that is separate from the historical reasonings of the 4th of July. And that's a starting point, at least, to get to that starting point. But the culmination, the fulfillment of that thought pattern is the day passing in and not being anything. You don't do anything differently on the 4th of July than you did on July 3rd or you did on July 5th. You eat on July 3rd, you eat on July 5th. So eating on the 4th of July don't mean you got to fast on the 4th of July, but it also don't mean you got to take a picture of your plate and show everybody that you got your burgers and your brats and your hot dogs cooked. It also, don't mean that you got to, I've never been a big fireworks person, so I don't see I don't get the same allure that other people get from fireworks. But you have to understand that if you are letting off fireworks on the 4th of July, you got your kids letting off fireworks on the 4th of July, again, it's a thin line between being an individual who wants to partake in entertainment and being an instrument of propaganda. It's that thin of a line. Coming out for the parade. I tell people all the time, what are you coming out to the 4th of July parade for? I've been out here at the 4th of July parade protesting it, and the people who come out here, it's a lot of racist people that come out here. At these different parades, people that have been called racial slurs. The way that these people cheer for the police, I watch them cheer for the police and then watch a bunch of young black people in the NAACP come right by and them not cheer for them at all. And that's another thing you have to begin to, when you are challenging some of these things, you have to accept the realities that your neighbor is probably a racist, that your girlfriend's father is probably a racist, that your best friend, he probably a racist. He probably grew up in a racist household, bought into racist ideologies, racist thought patterns. Simply having proximity to black people or proximity to people of color does not bypass racist ideologies. If that was the case, then slave masters wouldn't have been racist. Again, that's why it's important to have an understanding of history. When somebody says, well, I've had somebody at one of these parades tell me, I have black grandchildren, I'm not racist. Thomas Jefferson had black grandchildren. It's not been a time in American history where white men wasn't out here raping black women and having children. There hasn't been a time in which white people in some way or form weren't in close connections with black people. Proximity does not defeat prejudice.